Would you play an RPG with no main story? One that follows 4 primary tenets of scope, choices, consequence, and role-playing. An RPG spanning an astounding 201,160 square miles over twice the size of the Elder Scrolls II, Daggerfall. The not incidental inspiration for the RPG being made by Once Lost Games, founded by the former developers of Daggerfall. But size isn't everything, or at least that's what I've been told. So what else does Wayward Realms, the upcoming RPG that recently launched their Kickstarter, have to offer besides size and RPG royalty bona fides? Well, a lot from the sound of it. The game is described by the team as a spiritual successor to the Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall, the Wayward Realms, a medieval fantasy role-playing game led by industry veterans Ted Peterson and Julian LeFay, that aims to bring the old-school design philosophies of classic RPGs together with the latest technology and quality of life improvements, courtesy of Unreal Engine 5. And this game has already been in development since 2019, which might be a little bit surprising because they just launched their Kickstarter, which is currently working its way to full funding as we record this. Wayward Realms is being built in first person, as you can see from all the footage they've released so far, but they plan to include full support for third person down the line. They're also aiming for early access release of their RPG as soon as next year. The game sounds pretty incredible, I'm not gonna lie. It sounds like it's hitting a lot of the notes that will make me very invested in at least giving this game a shot. But I have at least a couple concerns that we'll get to at the end of this video. First, I want to talk about what this game is and what it is promising. As we go through this, I do want to give a little disclaimer here. This game is currently in development. It is also, as previously mentioned, a Kickstarter game, meaning that they are looking for people to back the game. I don't think we have to go very far to look at games that have in the past overpromised and underdelivered. So just keep that in mind as we go through this, that this is all the hopes of the team and what they are planning to do, but they still have a long way to go, and they're still looking for a publisher down the line. More on that in just a sec. And just to add to that, because it sounds a little like accusatory after I recorded it, I'm not saying anything bad about this particular project. It's just a general disclaimer for any game that is being funded in this way. This game is, of course, obviously very heavily influenced by Daggerfall, but it's taking that game further while sticking true to its core design pillars of scope, choice, consequence, and role-playing. The scope of the game we've already touched on with its huge size, but it goes beyond that with a world that is changeable through war, growth, and deterioration, expansive dungeons, and procedurally built cities. Perhaps even more important, the game sits upon thousands of years of history, tons and tons of world building, which perhaps is best highlighted by the fact that this game is going to have its own book written about it. Written by the creative director of the game, Ted Peterson's novel, Fool Me Once, follows the story of a goblin jester caught amidst the political intrigue of Splendor's Civil War, acting as a prequel to the game. As a voracious fantasy reader myself, I mean, after all, I have entire bookshelves dedicated to fantasy books and tattoos of the same nature. As well as a writer, was already kind of sold by this part, I think. I was already very invested once I saw that they were taking the world building part of this intensely, that they were going to be writing a book for it. And book tie-ins for video games, for me, some of them have been misses, but some have been absolutely phenomenal. And they always are the kind of thing that I love to see with an RPG because it lets you invest in the world even more. And I really want to see what this is all about. And I hope this book will be sold separately, because as currently, I believe you can add it as an add-on for a signed copy. But I really hope they do a mass market of this, like ebooks and things like that. This to me all guarantees a very solid bedrock of world building. Something that I think you'll actually see a little bit of in who you can play as in the game. Wayward Realms will allow players to pick from 8 playable races, including the most obvious: human, elf, dwarf, and the less obvious and increasingly intriguing to me: orc, ogre, fae, goblin, and cambion. It should be noted though that these are planned for launch, not early access, with some of the playable races slotted in at different stretch goals. The two early access playable races for hitting the base goal of 500k are the human and the orc. Their second pillar is choices, but it ties so neatly with the third and fourth pillars of consequences and role-playing, I think we can all kind of just like tie them all together. And also because this video is already getting pretty damn long, I figured this would be a good way to condense it. Not here to waste your time, although this is wasting your time. I'm gonna shut up. Wayward Realms is crafting a game where the choices you make are meaningful, not just choices of what quest to take, who to help or who to harm, but also where to go and when, with the potential to have lasting effects on the world you inhabit. Even your inaction in the face of world events can have a lasting effect. And for those of us who have played several games, I mean, I got myself lost in side quests of Skyrim, and then, eventually made my way back to the main quest and was surprised to see that nothing had changed. It's it's a bit of an interesting thing to think about, that your inaction on things could actually have an impact. It also adds a little bit more consequence. From the role-playing perspective, they plan to have a diverse build system that allows you to shape your character to your specifications without forcing you into any designated role from the character select screen. You are both creating a character and the world around you in a sense through your choices, actions, and the role that you choose to play. Yeah, and there will be the ability to do a complete pacifist run if you want to, as well as, fishing.
I'm sorry. You say you would rather just spend your time fishing?
And with all that scope, it makes more sense why they have eschewed one of the things that is pretty much in every single RPG out there. A main quest. Remember how I was talking about like in other games that may or may not rhyme with Skyrim? That's not rhyming. Well, in that game, you had a main quest with tantalizing side quests that took you all over the world. That you may or may not ever do the main quest. I actually never finished the main quest. There's no main quest here at all. When I first heard this, I was actually a bit concerned. Without a main quest to guide you, at least initially, would a game feel rudderless and aimless? A book without a plot? But as I read further into the game, it became a major selling point for me, something a bit different. The way the game is being described makes me think of it more like an MMORPG than an RPG, where the world itself becomes, in a sense, the main story, but by diverging and branching off in different ways depending on your playthrough. The game takes a layered approach to story building, with the main quest essentially being built from you instead of pre-built. Your choices become central, not just in what you do, but what you don't do. You are the main quest. What factions you interact with and don't. What NPCs you help or don't. What world events do you engage with or completely ignore. And it all ties together with an interesting feature they're calling the Virtual Game Master, which we'll actually get into a little bit later in more detail after this, because it's also my primary concern about the game. The Virtual Game Master, I admit, confused me a bit when I first read about it, and I'm still not quite certain how this will play out in real time, but they described it as the Virtual Game Master, or VGM, is a system designed to bring role-playing to the next level. Brought to life using the latest in machine learning technology, the VGM is meant to tailor a player's gameplay experience to their strengths and weaknesses, as well as their preferences and choices. Machine learning in this context, as far as I know, is essentially the game looking at what you've been doing in-game and trying to adapt to you within frameworks by analyzing the data you've provided through your choices, your actions and inactions. For Wayward Realms, this takes the form of the VGM creating new quests on top of the other handcrafted quests they already have by utilizing a 5-act structure, filling in the blanks within a designated framework where you are essentially the one who's doing the filling in. All of it while done in the background. In theory, it sounds very intriguing, but until I see it in action and how much human interaction and guidance it includes, I'll be hesitant. But hold on to that thought, that hesitation. First, let's talk about something more concrete and less new. How the actual gameplay will, play. You'll be able to use both melee and magic combat. For melee, it will have traditional click to attack combat as well as precision mode, inspired by Daggerfall, which lets you swing your mouse in directional combat. I appreciate when games offer options like this to engage with combat in different ways to best suit their playstyle. It definitely takes more work, but with combat being so deeply tied to the basic enjoyment of an RPG, it can sometimes make or break a game. And now you'll have two choices to potentially get mad at. But I'm actually perhaps more interested in their magic, because they give some tantalizing teases. Not only will they have magic in game, but you'll actually have the ability to craft your own spells with over 50 unique spell effects. Some of the spells mentioned were the ability to see through NPCs' eyes, entrap them in stone, simple projectiles, and magic ways. Oh, and, necromancy. Who needs friends when you can just raise them from the dead, I guess? It's all something we might be getting a look at sooner rather than later if their Kickstarter is successful, as they plan to release early access starting next year. And this is where they get really upfront about what their early access plans are, setting a $500,000 goal so they can fund development for a year and then release it into early access, hoping to get further funding through a publisher. If you back the game as a Kickstarter, you're backing the early access build of the game, which does make the 500k goal seem more realistic, as games with this type of scope they're talking about would likely far exceed that goal many times over. And I greatly appreciate that they're upfront with their plans with the Kickstarter. They're not saying that 500k is going to get the game and that you're going to be able to access it right away. They're saying that 500k is to fund them for a year so that they can keep working on the game and get an early access title out so they can eventually get a publisher. And something to note with a publisher and with this eventual goal is publishers have some say oftentimes, on how that works out. So just keep that in mind as well. This is not necessarily an indie project, although it is kind of an indie project, at least now. But of course, it goes beyond that with early access. And early access, I think, in a lot of ways, especially in the RPG space, has been done a humongous Baldur's Gate 3 size, Larian size favor, because Baldur's Gate 3 from Larian showed that early access can actually fundamentally make a game better. Now, it took them many years to do that, but they listened to feedback from players. They took proactive actions to address things, to change things. Not everything is going to be changed in a way that everyone was happy about, but they actually did kind of work with the community to make that game. And it sounds like that is what this game is going to be trying to do, to be an active way of using early access to take feedback using surveys and polls and communicating directly with players that will have early access to the game to really see if the game is what they want and if it is hitting the right notes. When a game uses early access in this way, in a community effort to make a good game, basically using thousands or hundreds of thousands of players as QA testers, there's a downside to that, because that should be done by paid people, but also the upside is that you might get a game that is more well-rounded and more well tested. The game sounds like a dream come true in many ways, so there's always going to be a catch. I think the most obvious is that it is entirely possible that this game never gets made. Even if the Kickstarter is successful, that doesn't guarantee a full game, so anyone considering backing the game should be very well aware from that. But for me, the biggest concern of this was all about the virtual game master and the intersection between machine learning and large language models, or what generative AI, and how that's potentially being used or not used in this game. In fact, their openness to using large language models is a red flag to me. On Twitter, they were asked if the virtual game master is more like generative AI or more like machine learning that uses traditional procedural generation from that. Their response was, the virtual game master is more of the latter. That is referring to machine learning with procedural generation, not generative AI, not large language models. But we have been exploring using an LLM to generate dialogue, though it needs to be explored a lot more to make sure it can't go off script or give out information that does not fit the world or is incorrect. Generative AI has a lot of issues. There's ethical issues, but for the point of this video, we're going to stick to the idea of that right now, what generative AI tends to spit out, especially in a fiction writing type of way, is, for lack of a better term, dog shit. It's dog shit because it is essentially copying without the ability to tell when things are not working. So it's just emulating things. And having played some games recently that used generative AI as a shortcut to actually, well, doing the writing, it doesn't work very well. It comes across very bland. The way that the inflections aren't right, the story beats don't fit, it just doesn't fit right because the whole process is just not there and may never actually be there. And so this willingness to even look into them is a bit concerning to me because it's also tied to something else: size. I joked at the outset about how size isn't everything. Well, this is kind of what I mean. If you're getting to a point with this game in development where you're already considering, I might need to use a large language model to fill out all of this because my current team size can't handle it, and we need to find a way to expand. Well, that makes me worry that the size of the game may take precedence over depth of the game. If you have an ocean with the depth of a puddle, it is less engaging than a puddle with the depth of an ocean, at least as far as I'm concerned. I would rather follow a deep emotional story than several boring, not emotional stories. But that's a lot of me projecting, I think. So I do want to say that depth appears to be very important to this game. So I'm not saying they're trying to build this gigantic ocean with puddle-like depth. It is the concern I will have until I get to actually play the game myself. And it's not something that's limited to a game like this. It's a concern I have with every huge open world game. When you expand out to that size, that massive scope, what are you potentially sacrificing? Because to make it that freaking big, that takes a lot of work to really fill it out. A lot of hours, and you can only speed up so many hours with so many people. If you consider that this team is currently 40 people, which is a decent sized team for a dev team, and then consider how many hundreds of people are currently working on The Witcher 4, 400 people, or how many hundreds of people worked on Baldur's Gate 3, that worries just a little about depth. But all of that said, I've actually backed this game myself. I have backed this at one of the pledge levels where you get early access to the game, and I am excited about it. I am excited because I believe that the team making this has earnest desire to make a really good game, and a game that they have been wanting to make for decades. And that's why I decided to go ahead and make a video about this game, even at this very, very early stage. This video is not here to encourage you to go do the Kickstarter if you want to. Although if you do, I have linked it down below. This video is because I want to believe in RPGs that are going to try and craft an experience that we'll be able to enjoy and be emotionally distraught over for years. My name is Wayward Flynn. Thank you so much for watching. And if you want to take another look at another RPG that I'm very, very interested in, and I got an exclusive first look at, check out this video on Mirthwood right here, which combines a little bit of Fable and Stardew Valley. Thank you so much for watching.